2 hours, so we'll begin right away. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion.
I now declare the meeting open. Welcome to the meeting 39 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Pursuant to the standing order, we are meeting within the framework of our study Public Accounts in Canada 2022.
Mostly back are witnesses from the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan. Nice to see you again. Auditor General of Canada, Etienne Matt. Voilà, bonjour, Monsieur Matt, the principal. And Chantal Perrault, principal as well. Nice to see you all. From the Department of Finance, Michael J. Sabia, Deputy Minister. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Nicholas Leswick, the Associate Deputy Minister, thanks for coming back. Evelyn Dancy, Assistant Deputy Minister, Economic Policy Branch, thank you as well for being here. And from the Treasury Board, Secretariat, Roch-Huppé, the Controller General of Canada, Manya Lae, Assistant Controller General, Financial Management Sector, and Diane Parasini, Executive Director, Government Accounting, Policy and Reporting. We've heard opening remarks previously. I understand, Mr. Huppé, you have I think a response from one of our members. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes right off the top to address that point. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was actually there was a couple of takeaways at Friday's meeting. One that we had said that we had hoped to come back in writing beforehand, and there was a question from one of the members on a variation as it relates to the passport office spend. So I'm really sorry, I want to say, for not having been able to send that information. We were working with Passport. I actually got that information and the analysis completed at around noontime today. So again, I just want to say I'm sorry about that. We're happy to follow with more details. But one of the more precise question was around the drop in the salary expenses from 2021 to 2022. And I guess the point being that there was a lot more business from a passport perspective done in 2022. So why exactly is there's less salary charges? So actually, the larger part of the explanation for the higher salary expenses in 2021 is because there was a settlement of some of the collective agreement for PSAC, and these retroactive pay for those settlement happened actually in the year 2020-2021. Also linked to those negotiations, there was some Phoenix damages that were negotiated, and again, those one-time payments were done within 2021. There was also in the previous year moratorium on the automatic cashing out of annual leave. So if we get over a certain threshold, there's automatically employees get cashed out that excess leave that they have. That was put on hold for a little while, but that moratorium was lifted during that year again, and therefore we've seen these automatic cash outs get started again. So that's basically the explanation for the close to $7 million in drop as it relates to salary expenses. The increase in revenues, there was obviously a very big increase, and that's basically as a result of the business going back up. Basically, there was a million more passport issued in last fiscal year, 21-22, than the previous year. So again, sorry about not having the capacity to have came back. Oh, and I think there was also a question on special services and an increase there, professional services. The 212 million up to 265. That's basically because of the increase, volume in business, the additional 1 million passport difference between 1 year to the other. ESDC plays a very important role in the issuance of passport, and they charge for part of their services Passport Canada. So again, that's a reflection of the additional business basically, and the additional charge from ESDC to the passport office. Hopefully this answers part of your questions. Thank you.
Could I just ask a quick question? Would you advise if the member wants to circle back on that passport question, are you able to answer questions today, or would you recommend we wait until you submit that finding? I'm just wondering if just to preempt the member, if he should ask you, or if you've got additional knowledge, or if
Well, I've got part of their variance analysis, so it would depend. I mean, I welcome the question from the member, to be honest with you, if there's any follow-up. And worst it comes to worst, we'll just take
Okay.
that portion back also, and be happy to come in the next few days and with a written answer to the question.
Just, Mr. Chair, if I can just briefly say that answered some of my questions, but I had also asked about the significant variation between the estimate and the actual spending in both 21 and 2022. Orders of magnitude of difference between the estimate and the actual. So if you have that answer now, or if you want to provide that in writing subsequently, either is fine. But I did want to just flag that had been one of the questions I'd asked as well.
So, thank you. So, the difference between the estimate and the actual is basically simply what their expectation was of the take-up of the, I guess not the take-up is not the wrong word, but the business being taken up. So they had estimated, like I said, there was 1 million passport different between 2021 and 2022. They expected the business in 2022 to be even higher than that, basically, and perhaps to be even pre-pandemic levels, which was not the case. So they fell in the middle, should I say.
Thank you. That was almost a 5-minute statement. That's perfect. I'm going to begin the rounds now. Turn to you, Mr. McCauley. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Witnesses, welcome back, most of you, and Mr. Sabia, welcome back from last year. Just wondering, Ms. Hogan or perhaps Finance, could you let us know what is the total amount of provisions last year and provisions for the fall and the next coming 2 years for losses from ineligible payments for CERB, CEBA, and other COVID support programs?
So I can tell you that during our audits, we always audit and do a lot of work around estimates, especially when it comes to provisions and allowance for doubtful accounts. The disclosure is aggregated in the public accounts. And so the question would have to go either to the Comptroller General's office or the Department of Finance for more details.
Mr. Leswick or Finance then?
Thank you for the question. In terms of how they're recorded in the current public accounts, are you looking at? I mean, Rock, you might...
There's been provisions, I assume, for expected losses for ineligible CERB payments, CEBA payments, other payments that we will not be able to recover. I'm wondering how much provisions or how much has been written off in this public accounts, and what's been set aside or forecasted for provisions for the next couple years.
I understand the question. Thank you for the question. I think we should start with the first leg of the question, though, in terms of how they're displayed in the current public account.
For how it's displayed, I'm looking for just a lump sum.
I totally understand what you're looking for, and I just want to
Go
pass
to the,
it to
you're
the
just going to
controller.
controller.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's
Thank
do
you.
that, Kelly. Mr. McCauley, excuse me.
So as it stands now, what has been recorded right now as overpayment as it relates to CERB and EIRB is $5.1 billion, as I mentioned last Friday. There is an allowance that was taken. It's grouped with the overall allowance. But if you would go to the site of ESDC and CRA in their own financial statements, you would see the aggregate at or the more detailed level. If my memory serves me right, Mr. McCauley, it's about the two of them together, about $1.2 billion.
Is there provisions for CEBA yet? Or because we haven't got around to auditing that yet? Or other losses from other COVID supports that perhaps have gone to ineligible, or perhaps money we're not expecting to be repaid?
So basically, absolutely. So every time there's a loan or a receivable, we have to estimate the portion that we think is uncollectible. So for CEBA, right now, if I'm not mistaken, we have in the loan category about $44 billion that's registered as total loan. We have an estimate in the book on the allowance that we take on the portion that we estimate that is going to be forgiven. If you remember, there's very
For the
specific
forgiven, just like the
circumstances.
bad, perhaps the bad loans provision.
Yeah, there is, and there is, in the total allowance, there is also a portion that is attributed to bad loan. The portion that is attributed in the book as to that expected to be forgiven or estimated at the moment is 13 billion last year and 1.5 billion this year, actually.
And what about for next year? Are you forecasting it to next year?
Well, I don't have the forecast for next year. On the public accounts, what we do, we take the allowance on the
Realize that.
actuals.
Mr. Leswick?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And we don't take additional expenses related to any growth in those receivables. So effectively, no additional expenses. So it would be wound down.
Right. I want to get back just to a question I had on last Friday, but perhaps I didn't ask it clear enough. And it's not necessarily public accounts, but it's regarding provisions for funds that will not be able to get clawed back or recouped. For the advance for the Canada Workers Benefit, in the fiscal update, there's $4 billion that will be advanced for ineligible payments. That's basically getting written off in advance. Why that's not going to be recouped? Where does the change in policy come that money that we know is going to ineligible recipients, but the government's not going to recoup that? And why is that being treated that differently than perhaps CERB or other payments?
Thank you for the question. It's a good question. When the government brings forward the legislation to give this the new program design character, it will effectively deem that an entitlement. So you will be entitled to an advance payment of the Canada Worker Benefit in the current year based on your previous year's income. So it's a change in character of the program fundamentally.
But it will not be recouped. Even if someone's found to be ineligible, the plan is not to recoup it. So why the change? Or where does that change come from in policy?
No, and thank you. It's a good question, but it also, I just repeat, it's a fundamental change of the program design. So the idea of recouping it or ineligible would not apply under the new legislative design of the program.
That's what I'm asking. Why are we writing off $4 billion for ineligible for that, but perhaps people from CERB who aren't eligible will have to pay it back, but not for this program?
But it will not be there will not be an ineligibility. The program will be restructured so that those will be eligible. It will be an entitlement based on the previous year's income. It's a fundamental restructuring of the program.
Thank you, Mr. Colley. I'll let you come back to that on your next round. Turning to Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put my question to Ms. Hogan. Just to summarize the comments heretofore, the comments you made respecting public accounts, you said that in all meaningful aspects, the government correctly made an accounting of measures connected with COVID in its consolidated report for 2021-22, and that you reported on your observations, and among these observations there is a paragraph which is meant to draw attention to certain amounts of money in the report and in the notes connected with it having to do with the COVID pandemic. Now, nevertheless, this paragraph does not modify the opinions made by the Auditor General. I'd like you to speak to whether or not it's normal. Now, obviously, COVID was an extremely important event, but is it important to have these comments following a recession or any other significant event? Well, the decisions to include a supplementary paragraph, this is decided year by year based on the events of that year. We wanted to draw people's attention to the fact that there was a significant event that had had a significant impact on the government's finances. It isn't really a change, it's simply something to draw attention to this fact. We've done this 2 years in a row. Now, if it was simply the very significant impact of the pandemic, well, we would still want to draw the reader's attention to this fact and its impact on the government's finances. We want people to truly understand the impact of the pandemic. Next year, we may make the same observation. Again, the impact of the pandemic on the government's finances. Question. Well, at the present time, we're still living within the context of the pandemic, but I think one might imagine that 20 years from now, there could be someone who looks at the report and tries to compare figures from one year to the next. How would a reader or someone who's doing an analysis, how could they understand these figures? Because if you look at the figures alone, there are great differences among them. Well, it's exactly for that reason that we want to draw the reader's attention to this fact. We wanted to include this paragraph in our report because if someone wants to know whether the government's finances know if why these results are what they are, they would have to read the entire report and know this significant fact. The pandemic, $300 billion in supplementary expenses in 2022. It will be $76 billion. These are significant numbers, and this is why we mentioned this. Well, if we look at figures alone, it seems it's like a roller coaster. If someone hadn't taken care to read the various comments, they might look at these figures differently. And now I'd like to broach a subject that we've already broached in other years, in more ordinary years, and this has to do with funds that have not been used. We always have to make sure that the various departments and programs, that funds are distributed to them. But there's still money that's left over that hasn't been spent. I think perhaps it's finance that might want to say something about this. What about this money, and what are you doing with present money available for future years? And how do you determine this? Is it the same way you go about determining things with all federal organizations?
For the question, maybe for a commentary on the current year lapse, Controller General, I might push that to you, and then I can take over in terms of how you would ask a question and how we project that into the future.
Merci pour la question. Thanks for the question. So basically, as you know, oui, je m'excuse, c'est vrai, vous avez adressé en français toutes mes excuses, madame.
Yes, I'm sorry, madam.
Les budgets...
Federal budgets work on an annual basis at the beginning of each year. Parliament has to approve, once again, the budgets, the government's budgets. But the business of a department doesn't necessarily end March 31st, and there are projects and programs that continue. So there is planning that has to be done to see if we'll be able to keep spending from year in, year out. But we may be in a situation where there are variations in what we're able to spend. This doesn't mean that the spending isn't done. Spending is done, possibly in the following year. So yes, there are lapsed funds, but there's a great amount of these funds, and we see this in this year's report. There's money that has been spent. I think it's $36 billion, and we call it, in the report we call it a net lapse funds of this amount of money. So there are amounts of money which will be frozen and will be transferred to the following year's budget. We have departments like Infrastructure Canada. Excuse me, sir. I'm going to stop you there, sir. I'm afraid that the time is up. And now, Ms. Sinclair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here and for having traveled to be here. During the last session, and we talked about this informally even more recently, these performance review that are carried out by the Office of the Auditor General are quite something. I'd like to reiterate the need to have these reports, especially respecting certain programs that are administered by the state, knowing that certain organizations don't have the same level of transparency as departments do. It's important for citizens to be able to obtain this information, and the work of the Auditor General is essential. There were questions previously about the emergency assistance for Canadian business, and we saw that there were grave problems with the administration of this program. So I'd like to repeat how important it is to have performance reviews. Now, I'd like to focus on one aspect of the report, of the Auditor General's report, which where it says that in Canada there are organizations that do not have to prevent ESG reports. Now, how can you explain that these norms have not yet been required in a country that does have rather ambitious targets in terms of climate change? And how could one better contribute to this area? Excellent question. These norms, these international norms, these international standards are important, and Canada is trying to follow along with the international partners. But we have requirements, legislative requirements, according to which departments and certain crown corporations have to report on the environment or on environmental impact. They place great importance on sustainable development, and we encourage departments and crown corporations to consider these requirements. But as to establishing standards that one would have to be accountable for, that would be reported on by the AG, well, they may want to bring in measures, or they may wait for the public sector standards to catch up with the governments. So now I have a question for you, sir. Well, I think that the AG mentioned the fact that there's a lot of work being done internationally and in Canada. I think that Canada is seeing what it can do to restore these standards or reestablish these standards, bring them up to the international level. But this said, on our side, we're following all of this. There are various options that might allow us to begin to present more detailed reports. But these standards will be important for us being able to head in the right direction. Well, I think Canada is really behind quite a few countries. We clearly see that there are several standards that we have not met, international standards. There's the European Investment Bank where I worked, which was saying at the beginning of the 2000s that these standards had not been brought in. Now, that was a bank, but there are crown corporations that might have to deal with these standards, as did the European Investment Bank. And will Treasury Board begin asking that these standards be brought in, integrated?
Évidemment, on peut juste s'impliquer.
Well, I am personally involved with what is happening with these standards. These standards will allow us to make more official adjustments. All this has to do with our environmental targets, and these are decided on by various departments through various documents. We have to look at what's happening abroad and with some of our partners, and perhaps we should be as proactive as possible. I have, 10 seconds? 10 seconds, that's right. Okay.
C'est Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor.
Now, Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my colleagues. I think you're all asking very good questions today, and especially Madam Natalie. Thank you so much for introducing the topic I wish to discuss, which is environmental concerns, in particular the cost of climate change in Canada. It's certain from just the questions asked by my colleague to my right how important this is for Canadians and how critical it is to actually update our accounting principles to make more transparent for Canadians, how important it is to understand the cost to the public when it comes to these things. I know when I first was elected, actually, we had an emergency debate. One of my first emergency debates was on the flooding in British Columbia. Massive catastrophe. It affected my province dramatically. People we've heard from coast to coast to coast are concerned about this. We also seen examples of Hurricane Fiona and the catastrophe we witnessed there, and the public infrastructure and the people's communities being just completely uprooted. In my province, we deal with forest fires. I worked in the province of Alberta at the time when we dealt with huge forest fires totaling hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. And when we looked at ways to actually demonstrate that loss to Albertans, it was quite difficult because of these considerations. But for the sake of Canadians and the fact that we have an emergency present to us in climate change, I think it's important to attempt, without the kind of accounting principles that would actually make this discussion more fulsome, trying to paint a picture, if you can help me and Canadians understand the total damages that we've faced due to climate change. I had left my questioning last Friday with Mr. Houpé in relation to the question I asked on damages. It was, I looked into some of the more details that you had provided me then as well, and I referred to a particular section within Volume 3, I believe it was, which, quote, in 2020-21, 497 cases of vandalism and 109 cases of accidental damage totaled $2.9 million. By comparison, the 2022 public accounts detailed 579 cases of vandalism to buildings or real property and 284 cases of accidental damage, totaling $48.9 million. So most of that, of course, you can read as attached to accidental damage, quote, which jumped by 45.7 million. 12 departments and agencies reported damage or vandalism to public buildings or real property in the 21-22 year. The highest associated costs were reported by Parks Canada at $43.34 million, of which $43.26 million was accidental damage. Fisheries was a close second, and so on, those 12 ministries. And so I do want to get to both the Deputy Minister, the Auditor General and Mr. Houpé, but we can start with Houpé, please. Last week, you had mentioned that there was, in one particular account of yours, a conversation of a bridge and the total damages related to that bridge. And could you elaborate the cost of that bridge and the impacts it has and where Canadians can find this in this information you presented?
Yeah, so my comment last week, which I remember, was an example of the type of assets that we own, and you were looking for, damages as a result of these climate realities, I will say. So, give you an example. For example, Parks Canada has got some, and in relations to this year, some of the damages were caused to a storm in Cape Breton, and that's to roads. But I gave example. You also asked what kind of a. I'm not sure exactly which bridge, if it was a bridge, but there was damages to roads that is mentioned in there. But we have other types of assets that could have been damaged also. We own all types of real property, warehouses, bridges. So again, I was giving you an example of what could be damaged in case of a storm. Sorry for the misunderstanding.
No, that's all right. And in the sense that if you can help in relation to the accidental damages this fiscal year at 48.9 million, how much of it was related to climate emergencies?
I don't have that we would have to. I'm not even sure. Most likely, some of the departments may have that granular breakdown, but we would have to get back to the organizations for that, honestly. And you know, when you talk about accidental damage in a place like Parks Canada, they own so many assets, you know, around the country, parks and stuff like that. So. And we have so many tourists that have access to these parks. Obviously, there's going to be some damages.
Yeah, I think the important part for members here is to understand that this number is difficult for both us and for you to understand. And when we're planning climate policy and climate liabilities, it's imperative that decision makers have this information. And I hope to impress on how important that is to not only public spending, but also to reviewing the public spending. And so how will the government ensure that the reporting around the direct cost of climate change is relevant and complete in the future?
So first of all, let me say that I definitely agree of the importance of having, you know, more granular level data around that type of reporting. Again, I come back to the fact that there are standards that are being developed. That said, even without the standards, we're always striving to kind of provide, you know, the best information possible from a financial reporting perspective. Like I said, we do have some reporting on our climate objectives and so on through the Greening Government, for example, strategy on the site of a Treasury Board Secretariat. Other departments also have that.
Be able to expand the question to the Auditor General. Well, while I have an opportunity, do you agree that it's important for the government to specifically note how much real property is lost or damaged in a year due to climate change?
It's interesting to sort of look back and say what was damaged. I would really like to see how much is being invested in building climate resilient infrastructure, and I think you do need to understand the damage to understand how much you can invest, right? As we recently released a report on emergency management in First Nations communities, we highlighted a statistic that Public Safety Canada brought up that said for every $1 invested in being better prepared, you could save up to $6. I think that could be translated into climate-ready infrastructure, but you do have to start by understanding the impacts of climate emergencies on buildings. But I think every organization, however, does that on their own, and what I'm hearing the Comptroller General saying is it's maybe difficult to aggregate it across the entire government because it's not tracked that way. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be maybe in the future going forward. As the government take an aspect, a view of being more climate ready and climate resilient.
And thank you very much. Turning to Mr. Genuis now, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. These public accounts documents are a treasure trove in more ways than one. I'm on page 140 of Volume 3, and I want to ask about this issue of debts that were owed to the federal government that have been written off or forgiven, effectively turning a loan into a direct subsidy. In particular, with respect to the Export Development Corporation, Crown Corporation, the line seems to indicate that over $820 million were forgiven, and that was based on number of claimants won. If I'm reading that correctly, that suggests that one company had a loan of over $820 million forgiven. Is my understanding of that data point correct?
Actually, that particular data point is an error. The EDC could not, at the moment, tell us exactly how many of cases that they had. So that one will be corrected in an erratum later on. So no, in this particular case, it's not meant for one case. I don't have the number for you, obviously, because we didn't get it yet, but it's definitely not one, to be honest.
Okay,
Mr. Genuous, gold star there. Please continue.
so, well, I'm not that happy about the gold star, Mr. Chair. I mean, it's I suppose good to know that one company didn't receive an $820 million loan written off. But it's still not that great news that over $820 million of debt was written off last year, and that EDC doesn't know or can't tell us how many claimants there were. Do they know? Did they? Are they looking into it? And how did that error happen? And can we find out the names of the companies?
So they are working on it, that I know. So again, assuming obviously that we could provide a lot more details on that breakdown of exactly what 122 million here, I think it's a forgiveness entails, to be honest with you. We can definitely come back to you.
Okay, I'll look forward to a follow up on that. But again, like they wrote off. So I'm just a bit incredulous here. Like they wrote off $122 million in loans, and they don't know how many companies, but they're working on telling us how many companies. And again, are we going to be able to access the list of companies?
You don't think?
Going out on a limb here, but I just want to satisfy, I think, the members' frustratedness here. That exposure is probably the $50+ million exposure to the Canada Emergency Business Account. So you're talking an exposure spread across probably about, in and around 1 million small and medium-sized businesses that were drawing loans against the Canada Emergency Business Account, which were administrated by the Export Development Canada, or Export Development Canada. So the $822 million is part of a $50+ billion exposure, just to put it in context.
Okay, do you know that, or is that a guess? Because you said going out on a limb. So
I'll work with the Controller General to confirm that. I just didn't want to. You seemed very unsatisfied with the nature of where the
well, I'm still unsatisfied if you're guessing for me, to be honest.
No, I'm pretty convinced in terms of how I interpret what I see in Volume 3. I haven't spent a lot of time in Volume 3 lately,
Okay.
but I'm pretty convinced that that's the exposure we're talking about.
Maybe you can spend a lot of time on it and get back to us with
I'll do
with
my
a
best.
clear answer or the appropriate person.
Sorry, just trying to follow up and satisfy.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I'm not satisfied, with all due respect. And I mean, these are the public accounts for 2021, 2022. So that would seem to be a lot of loans that have been written off already, right? I mean, if we were a few more years out from the launch of the Canada Business Account, and a certain number of loans were determined to be unrecoverable, but again, 800. That's just an enormous sum of money for us to be forgiving or writing off. Final question again: will the names of those businesses who are getting this subsidy be disclosed? Hello? Will the names of the businesses be disclosed?
It's up to EDC and Global Affairs, to be honest with you, in this one. So I'm not sure if they will disclose the names of the businesses in this case.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jennings. That's your time. I'm sure this is a topic that we're going to hear about again. Turning now to Mr. Fragascatos, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to witnesses again for coming today. I'd like to take the first opportunity with the question here to just get back to basics. I think that as Canada continues to confront a difficult situation, and with respected agencies like the IMF reporting that the next few months, if not longer, could be very difficult indeed, with the possibilities of global recession, and Canada would certainly be impacted by that. Canadians would rightfully have questions about the social safety net that they've come to rely on, particularly in the past few years. This question normally would go to ESDC, but they're not here today. I'm looking at Volume 1 and on page 221, it begins with a lengthy overview of the CPP of the Canada Pension Plan. I'll direct the question to Finance because that would be my my second option if ESDC isn't here. In the most basic terms, how stable is CPP for this generation and future generations? Can we say that there is real confidence in the sustainability of the CPP? Again, I ask the question because I have many constituents who do worry, who do look at challenges that the country, not unique to Canada certainly, but democracies in general, are facing. And they'll have basic questions about EI if it's going to be there. Last week we talked about EI, but this week I wanted to ask a question on CPP. So if it's Deputy Minister Savia that wanted to take that or others, I put it to you.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for that question. Look, I think it's a pretty straightforward answer to your question. And the straightforward answer is I think the Canada Pension Plan is extremely solid for a couple of reasons. First, how there are two sides to this. How from a government and government policy point of view, both benefits and premiums are always on the radar screen and are judged very, very carefully. And then second, and I'd like to put particular emphasis on this, the management of the Canada Pension Plan by the people who manage it. It is an exceptionally well-managed fund. Having spent 11 years of my life in the fund management business in another fund, not CPPIB, I can say that that fund in particular, among all the Canadian pension funds, and they're all very good and highly respected globally, certainly the Canada Pension Plan and the investment board that manages the Canada Pension Plan, I think is among the best in the world. I think my former place was actually there too, but I can't not say that. So I think Canadians should feel extremely good about the quality of Canada's pension system. So there's CPP. Tell me to stop if you want me to stop. I don't want to take all your time. But there's the Canada Pension Plan itself. But then, there's all the other elements of the infrastructure of pensions within Canada, be it old age security, the guaranteed income supplement, et cetera. I mean, one of the strengths of public policy in Canada is the security of the social safety net for an aging population, which I think helps set the country apart on a global basis. I think it's very, very good.
Well, it's a very reassuring message, without question. Even more reassuring would be to understand how CPP measures up against other pension plans in the G7. I don't know that you would have that information immediately available, but you did talk about deep experience in investment funds and seeing that over the years. Would you have anything on that?
I don't have. Minister? I used to have all those numbers in my head because the quality of their performance used to annoy me quite a bit when I was running the CDPQ. But I would say that their performance over a period of time, because it's not in any one year that you judge the quality of the performance of a fund of that size, but their performance over a period of years, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, because, as somebody once said, it's not the next quarter that you manage for in that business, it's the next quarter century. So it's their long-term performance that counts. And I think they, along with CDPQ and some other Canadian pension funds, stack up against almost anybody in the world in terms of the quality of those returns. I would also say, this is not a question you're asking, but to come back to the issues around environment and climate change, I think Canadian pension funds have been among the leaders in the world in staking out ground with respect to the importance of the climate transition. And they have done that while at the same time generating really world-leading returns. So I think these funds are a huge national asset.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sabia. Turning now to maintenant, c'est Madame Saint-Clair Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes.
Now, Ms. Sinclair Gagné, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, with respect to applying these principles, these accounting principles, these financial principles, since these are Crown corporations that are acting as financial managers, my question is to Mr. Sabia. We know that the Caisse de dépôt plays a leadership role. You mentioned it with respect to climate change, and there are other organizations who have been at the avant-garde in applying these principles. Were you shocked when you came to the Government of Canada? Were you shocked by how far behind we were?
Parler d'un retard, pourriez-vous expliquer?
Would you please explain this when you say we were behind? Well, the Government of Canada doesn't require of its departments or its Crown corporations it doesn't have standards of divulging certain facts. Well, I think that the controller has already answered partially. But from another perspective, at the Department of Finance, we always we continue working on these issues in order to improve the information we make public. It's very important to us, and we have created an advisory committee on sustainable financial practices. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't have much time. Can you give us some concrete examples? Yes, I'm trying to give you some examples. One of the important roles of this committee is to advise us on sustainable financial practices, and we answer your question. We will answer your question, which is a very reasonable one. But we're in a situation of transition, and these issues are increasingly important, and we're trying to find a way to make what we do more public, more transparent. Thank you. And now Mr. Desjardins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to quickly return to the Phoenix Pay system and the pay administration in the public service. I mentioned last week that the financial commentaries provided by the Auditor General state that 310,000 outstanding pay action requests existed as of March 31st, 2022, an increase compared to 254,000 the year ending March 31st and prior. Well, of course, some of these requests involve straightforward actions, as mentioned by the Auditor General when I asked about this last week. Some examples of that are the many kinds of bank changes or general inquiries that Mr. Houpe was able to provide us with last week. But the AG also noted that, quote, many others involve employees not being paid accurately or on time, and that the level of outstanding requests have started to rise, end quote. So I share the Auditor General's concern here, and a concern that I think probably most of the public service is also concerned with. So my question is directly to Mr. Houpe and the Treasury Board, and what would be an acceptable number of outstanding pay requests is the question I ended with last week, and I was hoping you could provide us with better clarity as to the appropriate levels of these kinds of pay requests, taking into account what the Auditor General mentioned before, that some, of course, are regular. I'm talking about the ones that should be regularly processed, but how many of those are irregular? And though of those are irregularities, are many of them underpayments or overpayments? Or both?
So it's the response to your last. I mean, it's both. To be honest with you, there's some underpayments or some overpayments that need to be dealt with. The issues that we have in the queue right now, highly complex cases. So PSPC, who's the responsible department, are taking steps to trying to manage their resources in a more efficient way to address the highly complex cases. Obviously, these complex cases sometimes takes. It takes a lot of time to deal with them. To your question, as I mentioned last week, right now PSPC receives about 120 to 25,000 pay requests or cases on a monthly basis, and the target is to basically handle in an acceptable time frame, obviously within their set targets, 95% of these. So one could believe, like I said, without giving you, there's no magic number, and I did reach out, to be honest with you. There's no magic number here of, what would the queue exactly look like, because like I said, there's different types of cases. But one can anticipate that a rolling, 5% or somewhat of that nature would be in the maybe normal zone.
Thank you, Mr. Desjardins. Turning now to Mr. Cram, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. On page 75 of Volume 1, it talks a lot about how the Government of Canada has about $17.5 billion in outstanding liabilities related to remediation of contaminated sites. And this was of particular interest to me because I represent a riding in Regina, Saskatchewan. And right in the middle of Regina, there's an old railway yard that local politicians have been talking about cleaning up literally for as long as I can remember. So I was wondering if the Auditor General's office was planning on auditing or investigating in any way how local or provincial governments can access and benefit, or have been accessing and benefiting from these funds that are set aside for remediation of contaminated sites.
We wouldn't be able to do an audit on what provincial governments are spending, obviously, since my purview is in the federal government. The note that you're referring to is actually the government's estimate of their projected cost to clean up sites where the federal government has accepted responsibility for the cleanup and that they're able to estimate the liability. So it isn't so much that organizations can access this. This is what the government projects it will cost to remediate sites.
Would you have any advice for municipal or local governments trying to access federal government programs related to contaminated sites, such as an old railway yard in the middle of the city?
I could take that from Ms. Hogan. Their MP should work hard on it.
Chair's prerogative.
I don't think that falls within public accounts, Mr. Cram. With all due respect, I think that's.
Okay, fair enough. Let me turn over to page 76 then. So let me read from page 76. It says the government's federal approach to contaminated sites sets out a framework for management of contaminated sites using a risk-based approach. This systematic approach aids in the identification of the high-risk sites in order to allocate limited resources to those sites which pose the highest risk to human health and the environment. So how does the Government of Canada work with the provincial and municipal governments to identify and prioritize the cleanup of these sites for which the Government of Canada has responsibility?
So I could start, and I maybe the Controller General would want to expand. I guess just to be clear, the sites that are listed here are sites where the federal government has accepted sole responsibility. So the timing of a cleanup, the procedures used to clean up will vary from site to site, and I think the Controller General might be able to provide you some details, but there's over 6,000 sites in there, so I would imagine it would be something they'd have to get back to you on.
On page 77 of the same volume, it talks a lot about unexploded ordnances. And I was a bit surprised to find there was a couple of these suspected sites that contain unexploded ordnances in the city of Regina. One was the RCMP depot, and another one was what was it here? The exhibition grounds where there's a military training grounds. So I was wondering if anyone can speak to factors that would lead to the classification of a site as being unlikely to be cleared, because it says that there are several hundred sites that are suspected to have unexploded ordnances which are unlikely to be cleared, and I find that quite concerning.
Do you want me to take it, or do you want to? So over the years, during our audit work, we do randomly pick sites to audit, and we go back and look at the environmental assessments and the approaches that the government's taking. So I couldn't tell you if we looked at any this year, but I know over the many years that I've been involved in the Public Accounts of Canada, there is a lot of experts involved who decide whether not touching the unexploded ordnance is the safest choice, and that it is in a safe it's buried far enough and that it doesn't cause harm to the community or anyone or the environment around it. So really that question is probably best asked to the Department of National Defense, who manages these sites, who could provide you with details as to what criteria they use to make those assessments.
And that is your time, Mr. Graham. I will say I am impressed you managed to bring public accounts to a local issue. That is impressive. So that does not happen often on this committee. Ms. Shipp, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again for coming in a second time. Ms. Hogan, in terms of additional environmental, social, and governance reporting, how are other countries handling these disclosures from an audit standpoint?
As we mentioned in some of the previous answers to the questions, it is an area that standard setters are really starting to delve into a lot in the recent years. There is varying applications. It depends the standards that are being applied by the country. The typical issues are laid around the valuation of assets, if you're trying to put certain assets on the books, but really it's about more the risks, disclosing the risks and the potential costs associated with those risks going forward. So I think you would see a very different approach across different countries depending on what their standards require, or depending if they've proactively take an approach. So I couldn't give you a more pinpointed answer than that. My apologies.
Okay. So you don't know, say, one country that stands out as a leader in this type of reporting?
Unfortunately, I don't. I'll look to my colleagues, but everyone's sort of shaking their heads no. Unfortunately not.
Okay. A follow-up in a slightly similar area. How does the credibility and completeness of Canada's public accounts compare to other countries?
So as we mentioned on Friday, my office has issued a clean opinion on the Government of Canada's financial statements. That is something that not many countries have done, so the Federal Public Service should be proud of that accomplishment. It's a lot of work for many public servants. There are few countries that actually issue whole of government financial statements, and there are two others that have clean opinions that I could highlight, which I believe is the Australia and the United Kingdom. I know we have them listed
Australia
here.
and New Zealand.
Oh, Australia and New Zealand, my apologies. So those are two other countries that also have clean opinions on their whole of government financial statements.
Well, I think we're pretty fortunate here. So I was looking at the Gender and Diversity and Indigenous Rights section of the report, and how would you report that in public accounts? How could you quantify this?
Can you direct me to where in the public accounts that you're looking at?
It was in Exhibit 9. I don't know if I'm a visual person, so I love infographics. It was in this section.
Oh, from our financial commentary.
This was looking at, I guess, at social reporting, and I was just wondering, how do you put this into numbers, because everything in those 3 volumes are numbers.
Exactly. A lot of this is about managing risks and having programs designed around those. So it doesn't have to be in the Public Accounts of Canada. It could be in the Financial Statement Discussion Analysis. That is really the story that talks to you about the numbers. It could be in other reporting that the government might do. For example, we also highlight in our commentary on in paragraph 47, some instances where the government is requiring certain requirements around social governance and risks and climate risks. The green bonds, there's new requirements for the crowns coming in. So it will be, I think, scattered about, which is probably the best way to do it. And then it would be up to somehow the government to roll that into the public accounts to demonstrate that it's done its responsibilities and due diligence.
How much time do I have?
40 seconds.
40 seconds? Oh, okay. Well, maybe I'll start this question and... Oh, okay. What constitutes 7.8% of other revenues? You had there was a nice pie chart of some sort. I guess it'll take 35 seconds to look it up. Maybe they're...
Is it in the financial commentary, or are you referring to something in the Financial Statement Discussion and Analysis?
It's not in the financial commentary, but I'm sure that...
So then I'd hand it over to perhaps Mr. Leswick.
Thank you for the question. Broadly, three categories: net income from enterprise crown corporations. We've talked a lot about crowns over the last number of hours. Program revenue, like returns on investments. So investment returns on some of our large asset holdings, like the exchange fund account. And then proceeds on the sales of goods and services. So whether that's RCMP policing or regulatory fees, the nature of those things. That's kind of the ecosystem of other revenues.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That ends our first hour. I understand, Mr. Cram, you are subbing out, and Ms. Kuzi, you're coming in for this next hour. I'm turning now to Mr. McCauley. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Leswick, I just want to get back to the worker benefit. Previously, it was a program where it was if you were a low-income worker, you would receive support. Now it's like you'll receive support based on previous year, despite what your income is going forward, which is where I understand in the fall economic statement that $4 billion is over the years. It's money for people who, based on the previous year, would not have been eligible for the workers' benefit. I just want to get back to that again. How did that come about to do that, decide that way, and how is it fair to those who receive CERB perhaps in error and are having it clawed back, whereas we're going out of our way now to say to the worker benefit folks, going forward, we're not concerned what you're making, even if you're making extra money, it's based on the previous year.
Yeah, no, thank you for continuing the exchange, and just so we can establish some clarity. So, I mean, again, it is a redesign of the program.
Just curious, just more where did the redesign come from? Like, whose decision was political decision? Was it Finance Canada deciding we're going to change the law this way?
I mean, it's always a political decision in the sense that the government has made a program choice to fundamentally change the program so that a recipient is now eligible for a quarterly payments based on their previous year's income.
Great. Perfect. I'm going to move on. Again, back to a question I was asking on Friday just about GST provisions for write-off provisions. Gross in 2022, there was, I think it was 51 billion, and the provisions were 10.5% to be written off. 2021, it was 9%, so it's a 14% higher provision for write-off. And the same with the corporate tax provisions for losses. It's a higher percentage in 2022 than 2021. I know it's difficult top of mind, but do you know what is driving this higher percentage of the provisions?
Thank you for the question. In our GST and corporate tax intake, I don't off the top of my head. I don't know if the Controller General would have any explanation for an uptick.
As well, provisions are higher because the GST is higher, but in fact, the percentage is actually higher. Provision or the percentage of provisions. So I'm just curious what's driven it, because it's one is a 14% increase over the previous year in percentage. The other is, I think it's about a 9% increase in provisions for the tax write-off.
I think the controller might have a comment. I see him reaching for his microphone. So go ahead, Mr. Huppé.
Yeah, basically, yeah, there's been an increase, but we'd have to take a look at exactly, there could have been sometimes there's a very specific case. For example, we need to write off on the tax side from year to year. So again, we'd have to take a look at the analysis that was done to get to that
like
number.
a ballpark rough answer. Like can't imagine there's one specific account, but if you just get back to us and give us an
absolutely.
idea.
Yeah.
Ms. Hogan, actually, maybe sticking with TBS, have there been any decisions made on changes to the public accounts going forward? Of course, there is that survey. Has anything been decided yet?
Nope, nothing has been decided yet. Moving forward, we're really in the inception of trying to consult with the key stakeholders. Hopefully, we do get some comments. I think this committee was also involved, and we will come back at this committee with the details of what could be but no decisions yet. Absolutely not.
Okay, but you will come back, present before.
We will come. We will not do any changes without engaging this committee. Absolutely.
And perhaps in your first opening statement, and maybe I misheard, it sounded like you were saying paying or clearing out accrued leaves had been suspended during COVID, vacation leaves?
Yeah, it's during COVID. So in a normal setting, trying to give you a concrete example, say I have 5 weeks of vacation, I could carry, that means that I could carry 5 weeks from year to year.
Right.
Anything above that gets automatically cashed out. That automation of cashing out was ceased for a bit of time and lifted not too long ago.
Get back to us what the average leave is outstanding per public servant and what the dollar cost is?
Yeah, we could probably do that. Yeah, yeah. Our colleagues at OCRO would most likely have some kind of data on that. Absolutely.
Thank you, and that is time. Turning now to Ms. Bradford, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hogan, can you tell me how much of an impact the lessening of pandemic restrictions had on the effective travel costs for ministers and parliamentary secretaries?
That's a real management question. I think that the government would be able to ask. I could not tell you. We don't audit to that level of detail.
Okay. Thank you. So, Mr. Huppé, there's been, quite a bit of discussion about problems with the pay administration system. How does the government plan to implement a long-term, sustainable, and efficient human resources pay system?
So what's happening right now actually is that there's testing going on a new potential option for a system. There's two things are happening. There's a lot of work being done on Phoenix. We're trying to stabilize as much as possible, and over the years there's been system modifications, again, investments in that system. But at the same time, as you would have seen in the media and so on, we're also in the midst of testing another potential system. We are taking our time. We don't want to be doing the same mistakes. So again, the testing is testing, very complex scenarios with departments. For example, like, the Coast Guard, a lot of shift work and stuff like that. So that testing is ongoing at the moment.
Do you think when they get ready to make a switch, they'll run the two systems maybe parallel for a bit just to double check what's going on? And
I would tell you that one of the key lessons learned from Phoenix was that the initial system, the old system, was actually turned off and not run in parallel. So one could hope that the day that a decision is made to move to a new system, it would be ran in parallel for sure.
I agree, one would hope. Now, looking at national defense, again, I think this is also a question for you. the one problem, was their inventory, and it wasn't really accurate and up to date. So I guess they've addressed that, but they need to implement that modern scanning and barcoding capability. It's been delayed. Do you know when that's expected to be completed?
Not exactly. Do you know? Maybe the Auditor General has a date. I'm not.
I do believe that it's a couple of years out. It used to be 2026, 27, and I believe it's at least 28 now. But again, it would be a great question to get a more specific time frame with the Department of National Defense. I do believe that they provide this committee actually with an update on their action plan. So it might be something that the committee could do is reach out and ask.
So right now, the action plan that they would have shoots for 28, 29.
Okay, given that the Department of National Defense is extremely active right now with deploying things to Ukraine and replacing that inventory and replenishing our stock, I think that obviously would be a priority. Ms. Hogan, in the financial audit commentary, paragraph 25, it says, overall, we're satisfied with the timeliness and credibility of the financial statements prepared by 68 out of the 69 federal organizations we audit, including the Government of Canada. As described below, the audited financial statements of the Reserve Force Pension Plan have not been issued on a timely basis. Do you know why that is, and what steps, if any, they're taking to address that?
This is an issue that we've been reporting for many years now. The Reserve Forces Pension Plan, for many years we actually denied an opinion, could not issue an opinion. They had trouble supporting the liability, the pension liability. The Department of National Defense worked very hard over the last few years and have been able to gather the evidence that we needed in order to issue an opinion. So we've issued 2018 our opinion on the. We've issued our opinion on a few years, but they're late, and so the expectation is that by January of this year they should be caught up. And then once they're caught up, we would expect that the Reserve Force Pension Plan will continue to issue its financial statements with an audit opinion attached to them in a timely basis, in a timely way.
Okay, and for how many years in a row have you issued an unmodified opinion on the public accounts?
This would be the 24th year.
Okay, and do you know is that the case for all provincial public accounts?
No, some of the provincial auditors generals issue modified opinions on the provincial financial statements.
Okay, so we have a very clean record nationally doing this.
We have a very strong public service who works very hard to put together the financial statements, and our audit opinion has been clean for many years, yes.
Now,
thank you very much. That is the time. A positive note to end on. Maintenant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes.
Now, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, you have the floor. Well, I really commend the creation of this committee, which will deal with sustainable finance. Now, it might be, I think, relevant to look at what corporate crown corporations do and what other companies do. For example, oil companies. There were millions and millions that went to these companies, and in the first quarter, there was already more and more billions that were invested in big oil. And with respect to this, I'd like to ask the Auditor General. In February 2022, the government invested more money in expanding the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Now, it is guaranteed that there will be a $10 billion loan that was contracted by Trans Mountain. So how much do you think that this corporation, this company, will be able to pay its debt? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I don't have a crystal ball to be able to tell you if the Trans Mountain company will have problems in future. Now, what about government finances in all this? Well, there again, this is hypothetical, saying what might happen Whether the government guarantees or not all this, it will depend on the debt. Yes, but knowing that it might be possible that the company couldn't pay its creditors, would the government of Canada, which is a guarantor of these loans, will it have to pay all this money? Well, yes. If the company cannot pay its debts, the government as guarantor will pay them. Well, does the government really intend to get rid of this pipeline when it's put all this money into it? Well, you would have to ask the government. All right, then I'll ask this question of the Deputy Minister of Finance. I will direct the question to you. Does the government intend to get rid of this pipeline, knowing that it is it's a guarantor of its debt? Well, first of all, you asked a question about how solid this operation is, this Trans Mountain operation is. So what I would say to you is, given the volume, given the flow of cash which comes from these assets, and we have carried out many analyses of this issue before we accepted to guarantee this $10 billion. And we are entirely convinced that the company will be able to manage all this well, will be able to manage their level of debt. And at finance, we don't believe that there is a financial risk. With this guarantee, we're quite comfortable with it. And as to the second question, things are going forward quite well with the construction, and it is the government's intention in time to sell this asset. Because after having built this enormous project, this very complex project, and after having finished construction, I think that the time will come when we will want to sell. Because the pipeline, or rather the government, doesn't want to necessarily be the owner of this kind of pipeline. Thank you, sir.
How long was that, John?
2.5.
Oh, 2, okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that. And is this our last round or second?
You'll have another round.
Okay, perfect. So in that case, I'd like to just finish our conversation and hear your testimony related to the Phoenix pay system. And it's been consistent, this unsatisfactory, I think, resolve for the public service to know that this continues to happen. And I really need to understand how we can make certain that these pay requests actually get finished in an appropriate level of time so the Auditor General doesn't come back here in 1 year's time, 2 years' time, and this continues to happen. And so to my question on building a pay system that actually works for folks and actually brings down the level of a pay request, because that's really the goal here, is to attempt to try to regulate and try to give some stability to workers in the pay request area. And so we need clarity. I need clarity. Canadians need clarity. It's clear by the Auditor General's report that there has been some effort to actually see a decrease in these pay requests. However, it's not perfect. What confidence and what measures is Treasury Board taking to actually ensure that these numbers continue to decrease and we don't see any, a continued pattern of really extreme pay system that's not working for folks and resulting in really catastrophic results?
So thank you for the question. I'll say that this is a real issue, and a lot of efforts and resources have been put towards that in the course of the, I would tell you, 5 to 6 last year, and the investments have been kept up to ensure that it got. So it did get better. We have a lot of work to do. One of the main drivers of that complexity is the web of rules behind the different pay actions, I should say. And that's driven by the collective agreements, so the entitlements that the employees have to these collective agreements. So one of the key actions that we're actually trying to do in working with the unions, obviously, is to trying to simplify this web of rule. This obviously will help us build a system that will. There's types of things that in
Just
our
to be fair,
payroll-
though, like
yeah.
it wasn't the collective agreement that did this; it was the Pay Phoenix system.
You know, it was the Pay Phoenix system, but the government is probably the most complex places as it relates to the types of pay actions that we have to deal with. And that's a result that over many, many years, it was, you know, some of the entitlements were negotiated through collective agreements. So, for example, if you're acting for so many days, you're entitled to this, and you could be entitled to, you know.
But that's an effort of it's a broken pay system, right? The system was
so
built
And that is
many
time.
issues with the system. I'm not going to deny that. It was not.
Order. That's time. I'm going to get everyone around another round, Mr. Desjardins. So, Ms. Kuzi, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Welcome to the committee.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la bienvenue. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, witnesses, for appearing today.
Hogan, I wanted to talk to you about Report 7 of your independent reports that recently came out relative to the lack of funding provided as seen as in Public Accounts 2022 and the impact that it could have on that it has had on the government's cyber security of cloud storage. In your report, you mentioned that despite Treasury Board releasing a cloud strategy in 2018, they provided no long-term funding model in an effort to implement this. So do you think that the lack of a long-term funding model for the cloud adoption has impacted departments' ability to maintain security controls, please?
So in that audit, we actually found that there was a few things that contributed to the weaknesses that we saw. So it's important to say that the government has controls in place that we didn't see them being consistently applied or monitored, which is a concern. And that's why we raised our concerns, because the government's at the early stages of moving to the cloud. Some of that was lack of understanding of the roles and responsibilities over who should do that ongoing, continuing monitoring of these. But also when we spoke to some of the departments, it was them not having the funding to maintain them long term. When shared services was set up, a lot of the funding was moved to shared services as all of the servers moved to a central location. As you bring some of that management back to the departments, there's the need to support the departments in identifying the long-term operating costs. And that's where there's an element missing, where departments are trying to find that in their current funding base, and there needs to be a more long-term sustainable solution if the cloud is going to be an option for many departments going forward.
In your report, you reviewed a real cyber security incident, and with that specific security incident, what issues did you find with the response?
We actually saw that the government had did a really good job at actually responding to it. They identified weaknesses and areas they could improve, and we saw action being taken. We actually thought it was a good example of the government having a good cyber response plan in place. But this reinforces the importance of every organization having that plan and actually testing it, because that's the best way to identify some of the pitfalls should an emergency actually happen.
And building on that, in your audit, you found 2 of the 3 departments lacked funds to implement their cybersecurity management plans. When departments didn't have sufficient funding for cloud adoption, what aspects of the adoption were typically dropped?
I'm not sure I have the granularity of that. What we were trying to highlight there was the importance of trying to find a long-term solution for departments instead of asking them to find it in their existing funding base. It's easy for a large department, but for smaller departments, it's a much more difficult task to find sort of those ongoing operating costs to pay for cloud service providers.
Yeah, and in your opinion, do you think the federal departments are successfully equipped to deal with a major cybersecurity incident?
Well, we only looked at 3 departments and the central agencies, and as we saw, the 3 departments had plans. They had tested them. The Treasury Board needed to work on testing its plan on a more regular basis. But cyber events are ever evolving and extremely sophisticated, and so you should never sit back and say, "Oh, we're ready," and stop modifying and testing. So I think they should stay attentive to this risk.
So building on that, do you think the lack of coordination among key government departments is making government information and the personal information of Canadians stored on the cloud more vulnerable to a cybersecurity incident?
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
The question is, I'm not saying it's unimportant. I just wonder, does it directly relate to the public accounts?
Chair, as I indicated
We're taking
in
out the
my
public
opening, it's
So-
specifically relevant due to a lack of funding which is provided, which is leaving our systems and the cloud vulnerable. So I think it's very relevant. If I'm not sure if the member would like to read Report 7 of the
No,
AG?
Ms. Kuzi, I've got it. So,
Okay.
Ms. Fragiskatos, as I try to be lenient with members about their questions, the auditor is showing no kind of pushback in answering, so I'm inclined to let her continue, Ms. Kuzi, let her continue with this line. It was initially related to the public account. I realize she's taken some latitude, but it is we've had friendly witnesses here, and I'm inclined to let it go. So, Ms. Kuzi, you have another 53 seconds, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Pardon me, Ms. Hogan, I'll continue with my question. So do you think then that the lack of coordination among key government departments is making government information and the personal information of Canadians stored on the cloud vulnerable to a cybersecurity incident, please?
So, Mr. Chair, I'm always pleased to answer any questions that members have. I leave it up to you to decide whether they're the questions that should be raised. I think you have to. It would be wrong to say that the cloud is any riskier than being on a server, right? Information stored digitally, whether it is stored on a server in a Government of Canada building or access through the cloud stored in a server in another location, is at risk of being compromised. And so it's about having the right set of controls that are consistently monitored over all of that. I just think that's an important aspect to bear in mind, that the government has good base controls. What we told them is they needed to strengthen them. I'll leave it be.
Thank
I see
you.
you're
That's
going,
good.
that
Yes,
time
and
is
we'll,
up.
we'll
There
be
you go.
coming, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to this. In
appreciate it. Thank you.
another study. Turning now to Mr. Dong, could you just say a few words to me before I start? I just want to make sure your microphone is working well before we turn it over to the floor. So just tell me how your event's going for tonight.
Absolutely, Chair. I think my mic is good. It's the House-issued microphone headset.
All right, so why don't you go ahead? You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Great. Thanks a lot. I want to tend to the finance folks first.
Mr. Dong, could you just bring the microphone down a little bit? It is a little bit hard to hear. So just bring your microphone. That's better, I think.
It is better. It is better. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, keep talking. Go ahead.
To the folks from finance, Deputy Minister, what's our debt to GDP ratio right now?
Well, I'll give you two numbers there. For 21-22, it's 45% of federal debt to GDP, and then we project that going down over the period of the fiscal framework over the next 5 or 6 years. And then there's some variation there in the economic statement that we published because, as you know, we published both a base case and a downside case, and that debt to GDP percentage changes depending upon what case we're in.
And actually, that's very a responsible way to do it because there's a lot of variable going forward. What is the federal government portion of that debt? I.e.,
Federal government.
Less. I.e., what's the subnational? Is the subnational debt also included in the 46%?
No, and those are a different set of calculations. So the numbers that we publish are the federal government and the federal government only. Then there's another set of calculations that are undertaken essentially by international institutions like, for instance, the OECD or the IMF, who make a number of adjustments. They include subnational governments. They make a number of other adjustments to try to achieve comparability between or among countries. That's not an easy thing to do. And one of the important changes that happens as subnational governments come in and these international comparisons get made is that assets like, for instance, large pension funds, like the Canada Pension Fund, for instance, comes into the calculation as an offset on the debt. There are a whole series of other calculations that are made, or adjustments that are made to ensure that international comparability. So you can't just take the 45% that is the way we calculate it for the federal government and then just add in the provinces. It's done on a very different basis.
Right. And I also noticed that there is, I forgot the terminology, but there is a 31% number following the 45%. Can you explain what that 31% is?
Yeah, that's the number that's used for international comparison purposes. That's the number.
So it count for all the pension asset and subnational, okay.
Yes.
And would you say that, given the fact that we just weathered a major pandemic, including all the relief packages, would you say that we're in a very healthy state comparing to, last time that we had a major crisis, and i.e. the recession during 2008 and 2009?
My answer to that, Chair, my answer to that is yes. This issue about debt to GDP and deficit to GDP, these are ultimately relative issues about how we stack up against other countries in the world, because really that's what's relevant here. It's not an absolute issue, it's a relative issue. So in both debt to GDP and deficits to GDP, within the G7, we are number one. We are in the strongest fiscal position of any country in the G7. And even in the G20, a much larger group, I think there on a debt to GDP basis, we're third or fourth, and on a deficit to GDP basis, we're about third as well. So really, no matter how you look at it, whether it's large industrialized countries in the G7 or a broader group in the G20, we are among the strongest in the world.
Is it relevant to our credit rating?
Pardon me?
Is the health of the debt to GDP ratio stacking up against our allied countries? Does that have anything to do with our credit rating?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, credit ratings are done on a government by government basis, a level of government basis. And as you know, Canada is among one of 10 AAA rated countries in the world. So the strength of our debt to GDP and our deficit to GDP, and overall, because it's not just those numbers, but rather the overall fiscal credibility of the government of Canada, that plays in a significant way into the AAA rating that the country has.
And did you notice?
Thank you, Mr. Dong. I'm afraid that is the time. Turning now to Mr. Genovese, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to start just with a follow-up to my previous question. So I raised an issue. I was told, oh, that's a case where there's an error in the public accounts. I'm glad I identified it, but you were clearly aware of that error because you responded right away. So how many other errors are there in this document that you're aware of?
Honestly, that's in our prep time to come to this committee. Obviously, that's one that we kind of fell on ourselves. So I don't know any offhand any other right now. It doesn't mean there's not a typo here and there, but not anything that I'm aware of right now.
So the one question I asked identified the only error in these documents, and there are no other errors in them.
Act is spelt wrong on, I think, the previous page, Bankruptcy and
that's fine, but
Act.
I'm interested in incorrect numbers. So that's the only case.
That's been identified.
Yeah,
none that's been identified. Okay, so I identified the only error that's been identified. Okay.
Yeah. Generally, what happens, There often are erratum that are published after the publication of public accounts, and there is a process by which any that are identified in advance of this meeting we do advise you of. It's generally departments or our office who, in going through stuff, will stumble across something and realize it.
Thank you. I want to ask about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This is on page 306 of Volume 1. As a matter of policy, our party opposes Canadian participation in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. We shouldn't be funding development assistance through a Chinese state-controlled development bank. There are many better ways of delivering those resources. In terms of the spending on this, though, I note that it says here the total value of shares is $995.4 million US dollars, so well over $1 billion Canadian, most of which is not paid in, rather is callable. Does this mean that the bank can at any time call for the remaining 80% of that capital, so hundreds of millions of additional dollars, up to $1 billion US? What are the conditions under which those shares could be called? Perhaps, Mr. Sabia, are you the right person for this?
Chair, as you rightly say, the paid-in capital there is only a relatively small fraction of the overall commitment. Sometimes these banks, the multilateral development banks, the manner in which they can call on additional capital that has been pledged varies across some of the banks. And I would want to double check on this one whether or not that is purely callable at the direction of management or of the board of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank before I gave you an answer to that. We can come back to you and give you a specific answer on that one.
Thank you. This so-called development bank is effectively Chinese state-controlled. So the mechanisms by which the Chinese state could, through this development, call, quote unquote, for Canadian capital are a matter of significant concern, I think, to me, probably to other members and to the public. So we do look forward to that follow-up. Just to say that the relative, Mr. Sabia, I'll give you a chance to respond. Your minister is a governor on this bank, which you called relatively small amounts of money, were I think about $160 million US. So that is well under half of the total callable. That's true. But is there, if the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank were to try to call hundreds of millions of dollars in additional capital from Canada, would Canada be obliged to provide that capital at that point, or is there a mechanism by which we could refuse to provide that capital?
I think I just answered that question by saying that we need to check. The rules vary across institutions, and I would just need to check to make sure that I gave you the absolutely correct answer to that question.
Okay, so the follow-up information I'm looking for is one, the mechanism by which this could be called. Two, whether Canada would have the discretion to say no if that mechanism were used to be called by the bank. Is Canada able to pull out of this, or are we able to get our money back if hypothetically a new government came in and didn't want anything to do with this vehicle?
The participation of the Government of Canada in the bank is always subject to the control of the Government of Canada.
Okay, how much money do we get back if we pull out, though?
Thank you very much,
get it all back?
Mr. Genuis. I mean, that is the time, unfortunately. I'm going to turn to Ms. Shanahan now. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I'd actually like to give Mr. Leswick the time to respond more fully to Mr. Genuis's question, because I'd like to understand, too, the nature of the infrastructure bank. Oh, was it Mr. Sabia? Sorry. Yeah. That was...
Oh, Nick, you I'm good with him.
I'm sorry. I didn't say it.
She confused us.
That's hard to do. That's hard to do. Go ahead.
No, there was. Sorry, just that very last question that the member opposite did.
Yes. Yeah.
you would redeem if the government of Canada chose to withdraw their shareholding from the Asian Infrastructure Bank. You would redeem the share value at that moment in time. So whatever the U.S. dollar conversion would be, and whatever value the shares would be at that moment of divestment.
Okay, thank you. I am doing a little bit of cleanup here too, because my colleague Mr. Dong is asking. He didn't have the time to ask whether folks in the finance department, you would notice a large spike of subnational debt during and after the pandemic. Why is that, and what does that mean, considering we're still the healthiest debt to GDP ratio in the G7?
Throughout the pandemic, we did see, both at the level of the Government of Canada and at the level of a number of, virtually all provinces, some increase in the size of deficits. That being said, the largest increase by far was at the federal level because, as I think you know, the federal government paid something on the order to 80–85% of the total cost of COVID. So the provinces were much less stressed financially. And as a result of one of the things that we've seen over the last 18 to 24 months, as a result of the strength of the recovery in the economy, both with respect to business incomes, individual incomes, commodity prices, et cetera, all of which have flowed into incremental revenues, we've seen a very significant turnaround at the provincial level. It's true at the federal level as well, but at the provincial level it's particularly marked, where a number of provinces, all I think but 3 or 4, are now essentially in a surplus position. So they have, because the federal government bore so much of the burden of COVID, and given now the strength of, quite actually remarkable strength of the recovery that occurred as the economy reopened, provincial finances are in, I would say, exceptionally strong, exceptionally good shape.
And has the government received any thank you notes from the provinces?
Yeah, they usually come in the form of press conferences about healthcare. And they're not exactly overly positive.
Thank you. Chair, I noted that Ms. Kusi was asking questions about Report 7, and I was delighted, for one, because this is a report that we want to study in more detail, and indeed you did confirm that we would be doing so. So I'm hoping that Ms. Kusi will join us again for when we do study that report, because it is cybersecurity absolutely top priority. And do I have time?
Minute now. I should preface that was a personal remark from my spot. I hope we will study that report, but of course it's up to members here. But let's get back to your minute and 4
otherwise,
seconds.
I'll have to ask cyber security questions at every meeting going forward in order to get the answers.
It's your
that I'm
dime,
looking for.
unless your colleague Mr. Fragascato tries to rule you out of order.
Well, we're open. We're open here in public accounts.
You're back on the clock to 1 minute.
Excellent. But back to, so a theme that we had, that I certainly addressed in the last meeting, was this balance or tension, if you will, between timeliness or the speed of reporting the public accounts and accuracy. And I think Mr. Genuis was rightly concerned about errors that can be found, but we have heard testimony that the public accounts don't just appear by themselves. They are dependent on information being provided by Crown corporations and many other departments and so on. Monsieur Huppé ou Madame Perserini.
Mr. Huppé.
Comments. Where would you rather fall? Speed of reporting, accuracy in the public accounts.
Accuracy is always the most important thing. Transparency, accuracy. Again, obviously, in a document that's 2,500 pages, there's bound to be some typos here and there. But like I said, as we as Diane Parasini said, as we find them, we actually correct them. But keeping in mind that not everything is audited in these books, obviously. There's a portion the financial statements are, and we have obviously an unmodified opinion there. I'd like to give kudos to the financial community for that. 24 years in a row. As we said, there are other jurisdictions that have unmodified opinion. I'm not sure they've had it for 24 years. So we're probably one of the top jurisdictions for that.
Agreed. Thank you very much. Going now to Madame Saint-Clair Desgagnés. Vous avez la parole pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Ms. Saint-Clair Desgagnés, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to continue along the same lines. Well, you're such a source of knowledge. So to get back to Trans Mountain, and you could always ask your colleague to answer. So for this particular project, you mentioned, and I just wanted to clarify what you said, it's quite rare that a state decides to own this kind of project. I think that's what you were saying in your last sentence. So I'd like to get back to my first question. Were you not shocked that this kind of institution should not eliminate investing in oil? But the Canadian state has confirmed that it is funding an oil undertaking, an oil project. Now, in most countries, the government shows the way, sets the example, and incites organizations, either private or para-public, to follow the example. Now, there's, the task force on financial disclosure in the UK. They have this sort of thing. So I repeat my question. Don't you think the government of Canada is really behind with respect to fighting climate change? Well, you've asked a question which has many dimensions, so I'd like to try to answer it as reasonably as possible. Well, at the end of my previous response, I said that according to the government isn't necessarily the proper owner or an appropriate owner of a company like Trans Mountain, but there's a very important distinction to be made between the proprietor of a society, or of a company rather, and government as helping to build this or to construct all this. Why should it not be an owner? I'm so sorry, but your time is up. Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor.
And I would like to now take the committee's attention to Volume 3 in relation to Section 3, Professional and Special Services. It's in the, I don't actually have the accurate page number here. It can't be page 35. Yeah, okay, you made it there anyway. But pertaining to the past 5 years, what trends have emerged about the type and cost of service procured by the federal government? Mr. Hupé, please.
Well, I could honestly say in the last few years, what we're seeing, the trend obviously is on health and welfare services because of the pandemic. So we saw greater use of professional services for departments like Health Canada and the Public Health Agency being one of them. When you take a look at the other trends, obviously there's not necessarily a trend. As I was explaining on Friday, we have large projects on the go. So again, depending on the needs and the timing of these needs, what we could see is a fluctuation in the needs for these professional services. But like I said, definitely in the last few years, there's been an increase in spending. We see it in the health and welfare. We see it in the business management, business services. Informatics services, again, with a greater level of spending, you will see an increase in professional services.
And then in relation to the special fees, in particular on special services, what is an example of a special fee?
Example of a special fee, you've got membership fees and hospitality fees would fit under this category as an example.
I see, and those would be, to clarify, those would be hospitality, and what was the first example, sorry?
Membership fees.
Membership and hospitality of those professional services.
Of those...
Contracted professional services?
No.
Or whose?
So
service?
membership fees could include
Okay.
things like fees for, like, I'm a CPA, CPA fees are paid. That's considered a membership fee, so it's not a professional services, but just within the standard object definitions, membership fees end up in there. Could be some international organizations. I believe it was the OECD is one that we pay a membership fee to, so that would be a membership fee. Hospitality is events where non-public servants in general are provided hospitality, often for reasons of diplomatic purposes or things
I'm
like
afraid that is time. Our second last member, Mr. McCauley, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and very interesting comments. I just want to briefly, one more issue, please, Mr. Leswick, with the CWB. Would you be able to provide to the committee the GBA analysis or the GBA plus analysis, the regional and income quantiles analysis for the changes made for the CWB, please? Page 70, I just want to bounce a couple things. Page 74 in volume 1, there's 5.6 billion in tax appeals, which is up considerably from 2021. Top of mind, do you recall or any answer why what's driving such a large jump in appeals?
There's been an increase in tax revenues, so obviously...
Not a 32% increase in tax revenue,
yeah.
so.
So well, that's part of the explanation is certainly an increase in the actual revenues themselves.
Should we maybe get back to us
Yeah,
with
absolutely, with
if
the
there is
details.
something more specific driving
Yep.
it. And Ms. Rupi, would you be able to provide to us what is the total amount of unfunded liabilities, pension liabilities, from obviously there's the pre-2000, but all the unfunded pension liabilities?
Yeah.
Would you be able to provide that to us?
We can certainly do that.
Okay. And just want to get back with the outstanding money trying to be recouped from CERB overpayments or CERB repayments and other issues. CRA, in response to a previous report on findings of post-verification, stated they delayed their post-verification till January 2022. Do you know if there was an accompanying added expected cost in unrecoupable money because of the delay in the post-verification work?
What I would say is that at the time of the public accounts, when we closed the books, the official amount that was provided from CRA and ESDC is a 5.1 billion amount that they deemed overpaid and receivable.
Yeah.
So actually, we took a provision on that. As I said on Friday, the work is still ongoing, and the expectation is that that amount will be higher than the 5.1 billion, obviously.
But I'm wondering, like, just the delay in doing that post-verification work. ESDC, the CRA continues that ESDC began following high-risk flags, including those requiring identity validation, but it was also delayed by about a year and a half. Just wondering if these verification delays are going to lead to higher write-offs, significantly higher difficulty in recouping overpayments.
I couldn't speak in this particular case for CRA, but generally speaking, what I would tell you is that you have higher chances of recouping an amount that is owed, if you do it quicker versus later. And that's the general rules around receivables, obviously.
Would we have well, I understand that. Would we have done an analysis of what these delays are going to cost the taxpayer?
Not to my knowledge. We'd have to ask CRA if they have that data,
Okay.
that analysis. And we'll gladly do that.
Okay. And I just have one last question just regarding pension discounts. We spoke about it last Friday, and it's one I've brought up before, the difference in the non-funded liabilities pension discount. We use, I think, real return. Then, of course, there's the higher one for PSPIB. Real simple and possibly too simple question. If we're using, I think it's a 5.8 discount rate, almost triple what we're using for the unfunded, why don't we just cut a check to the Public Service Pension Investment Board if they're getting so much better returns? Just cut them a check, and we would reduce our liability that way, rather than just continue to use it as a 2% unfunded. Or is it just a matter it's not that simple an idea?
You'd have to fund the unfunded, so I don't think it's that simple to be fair.
If PSPIB is getting almost 6%, and which is higher than what we're paying on interest rates, and much higher on the discount rate for the unfunded. Or is it just a matter of it's not that easy?
It's not that easy. Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Turning now to Mr. Fragascatos. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This question goes to Treasury Board, staying with Volume 1. On page 170, towards the end of the page, you'll see under the heading Public Services and Procurement a number of buildings listed. The inception dates for what are, in many, if not most cases, lengthy lease terms for a number of those buildings is quite recent, beginning in 2021, for example. But overall, the years are recent in general. 2014 is cited there a few times, and so on and so forth. My question is, do you have information on the number of employees that have returned to those buildings to occupy them in full?
So the buildings are not occupied in full, to be fair, because most organizations right now are working on bringing back the employees to work and in a hybrid fashion. So again, some departments like, Treasury Board Secretariat and Department of Finance, for example, have asked their employees to come back at least 2 days a week. Other departments are testing other options also. It could be 8 days a month. It could be something different. But right now we are working at bringing back. But I have to say, no building right now is fully occupied. Even the point is that even before the pandemic, you would have about 40% vacancy rate in our buildings because people were on vacation, sick, travel leave, or etc. So again, there is a lot of work right now to right-size the footprint the real property footprint, to make sure that we gain the efficiencies that are there.
Well, I understand that. I wouldn't expect that they would be occupied in full at this point in time. I asked the question especially in light of the housing challenges that we have in Canada, and thinking about the way that the pandemic and especially the turn towards hybrid has changed in very dramatic ways, not just how the public sector is approaching things like this, but the private sector as well, thinking about what will happen to those buildings. I know that there have been a number of media stories talking about the possibility of these buildings being turned into housing, affordable housing in particular, for those in need. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on where we are on that.
Definitely, there's a lot of work being done by Public Services and Procurement right now, because they're the major owner of the office buildings, and they are working at different plans, and some options is obviously, as you're saying, to hopefully turn some of these spaces in affordable housing.
Thank you very much. With the final question, I'll go to Auditor General Hogan. We've talked about the differences between provincial and federal public accounts. I wanted to turn attention to the international picture and what, if anything, Canada is able to, I would hope that there is something at least, to learn from other countries in terms of how they approach their public accounts, things that we don't do that they do. I'm thinking about other democracies, in particular those operating in the Westminster parliamentary tradition, that we could look to employ in order to improve our public accounts. I think they're very good in terms of how they're approached, but there's always room for improvement, I'm sure.
I have to admit, I don't think I've studied the public accounts of other countries. I could talk a lot about ours, but I'm not sure I've studied many of them. I know that some of them do a good job in talking in their financial statement discussion analysis about risks, about how risks are managed and going forward. The government's done a good job over the last few years in increasing that disclosure and being more transparent, but there's always, as you say, opportunities for improvement. I think a great way that the government of Canada could be a leader would be to start bringing out climate disclosures, but also to find a more accessible way for the public accounts to maybe be ready quicker, so maybe less volumes to be published. I mean, there's so many places that we could tap in to increase the usability and speed at which they're available. But I think that, as I mentioned earlier, the Federal Public Service does an excellent job in trying to get together a very complex set of financial statements.
And a clean opinion is a clean opinion, Mr. Chair, and I'll just I'll end there.
Leave it there, yes. Thank you. We ran late. I appreciate the witnesses coming in, being patient with us as we were voting, and for staying a little bit extra for an extra time. Thank you very much. This was a good 2 sessions, and I do want to thank you all for coming in. On that, I'll adjourn the meeting.